Today's subject is one that I haven't really seen a video on YouTube, weirdly, regarding this, and that is the fact that your photographs will in fact age. Now, I'm not talking in this video about photographs taken several years ago and your improvement in your skill. So choosing the right shutter speed, ISO, composition, exposure, whatever. I'm not talking about improving your skills and your photographs will get better, which hopefully they will. I'm talking more in this video about the actual content of the photos. Also, in my opinion, this is a subject I don't think some photographers will really like. I don't think that some photographers will like the fact of people saying that your photographs will eventually look old, or at least older. Some will try to deny that this happens. Some will perhaps even try and refute that this happens, and some will honestly just try to ignore it. Again, I'm not saying that photographs taken years ago are not worthy of comparing to nowadays, or that photographs taken 10 years ago are not sharp or not good composition or good look to them, that they're not worthy of even considering because they're from X time period ago. It is more the fact that this will happen, to be honest. Part of the reason why I think some will not like this subject is because a lot of the attention lately, especially the last couple of years in the photography world, has been about new camera technology. We've seen, of course, all the major companies like Canon, Sony, Nikon, Fujifilm all bring out new camera bodies uh, with new mounts, which lead to new lenses, uh, and also, of course, new firmware. Firmware has become a major part of it, and all of these new capabilities have really been pushing the envelope in the not only the capabilities of the cameras, but the abilities that photographers are able to have and to use, and in what they can capture. Some people may not immediately think of firmware, and I will highlight that because I think firmware is becoming quite a major part of cameras. Obviously, a lot of them are like mini computers. A great example of how firmware has become a major part is that Sony has recently released the 3.0 firmware for the Sony's A7R3 and A7 III cameras, and both of those have reintroduced what they used to have in previous cameras, which is an intervalometer. So basically, photographers, again, whether hobbyist, professional, whether you just general use cameras, you can choose whatever interval you want for the camera to take a photograph. So you want to take one photograph every minute, or every 30 seconds, or every 5 seconds. You can do that, set your camera, and you can create what is generally known as time-lapse photographs. So if you can, say, put it in your garden or put it in some public place, obviously out of the way, and you can kind of almost track the clouds or the sun or whatever it is going across the sky, for example. So I think with all these capabilities pushing the envelope, I think many people will think that using these new cameras, every photograph that they take will, by using the latest and greatest technology, become instantly iconic and timeless, and that is just simply not the case in my opinion. There are many different fields of photography that these cameras are used for. These are just three of them: sport, photojournalism, and street photography. Now, there is, of course, in every field of photography, the potential to genuinely achieve iconic and timeless images. Images that lots of people will remember for many years to come. Magazines may print them. Obviously, 99% of photographers unfortunately do not achieve them, but there are always the possibilities of it being achieved. And a quick couple of examples in this. For sport, there is the famous picture of Muhammad Ali, the great boxer, having knocked down his opponent, standing over that opponent while the referee, I think, checks or counts that person out. It's a very iconic image, and I'm sure many people. It's used a lot in TV programs like NCIS. It's hanging on the wall in the director's office. Many people will know the image that I'm talking about. For photojournalism, obviously that could be major events, major protests. It could even be world leaders making a speech or visiting some particular location, or even if it's just a portrait, a kind of a image of them standing somewhere. Some of those images can become quite iconic images as well. Street photography, that's a very easy one. For example, cities like Paris or New York, there are literally millions of photographs taken in those cities every year. For Paris, places like the Eiffel Tower, New York, there's the Empire State Building, or there's the view from or on top of the Empire State Building looking onto Central Park. Some of these images, they are very iconic, and a lot of people, of course, try and take their own version or their own copy of that image. So some of them do become overtaken, but there are some images, some landscapes, which kind of goes into street photography, I think, a little bit, of the cityscapes, really, I think you would call them. So there is always possibility in different fields to take iconic and timeless images. Like I said, unfortunately, 99% of photographers will not, unfortunately, be able to take one during their lifetime, but that's not saying, I think I said it before, it does not mean that you can't stride and continue to try and take the very best images that you can. Before I get into looking at imaging, uh, what the average person would look like, would look for if you were given some photographs and asked to judge whether these are recent, fairly recent, or photographs taken from a few years ago. There are different filters and effects, and I will talk about this in a future video that I'm planning, that can almost fool people as well. I want to quickly highlight this. Three of these images have been taken in with the filter and effects in camera, and one has been altered. It's the bottom right hand one that has been altered in my editing software, the Photoshop Elements, and there are various ones available. But the other three, the top left hand one has been set with the effect to bring out the greenery in or green color in the images. The top right hand one is to bring out the yellows, of course. I didn't honestly think I would get that kind of effect on the McManus galleries here in Dundee. I didn't think it would pick up the stone like that, which it did, which was a little bit surprising. But I could also see it through my viewfinder, which is a great thing again about modern camera technology. You can see what you're taking with, especially with EVFs, which many cameras use. And the bottom bottom left hand one again to bring out red. So both of the two ones on the left were from the Sensory Garden area in Slessor Gardens, so also here in Dundee. And the bottom right hand one, that was in effect I took again from Photoshop elements that I put on the image. So there are ways you can alter photographs to kind of fool people a little bit and make them look older or photographs older or fresher than they are. Like you said, there are ways of editing. There are ways of editing these images to make them look older or fresher than they are. There are a few. I'm going to keep it to just to three because there are a few different things I think people will look for. Again, if you're given a few photographs and asked, are these recent or fairly recent or a long time ago photographs? Uh, there are three of the things that I think people will generally look for is styles of clothing seen in the photograph, transport, what vehicles are in the photograph, and of course, if they have the knowledge, they may look also at the physical locations where the photograph has been taken. The first one, styles of clothing. Fashion is just like a lot of items in life continues to change and evolve. Some people talk about kind of fashion going round in circles and some things coming back into styles, but these are just four photographs showing you different kind of different eras or different time periods of clothing that's used. The top left hand side is from the late 70s, so it's kind of typical of that time period clothing. Bottom left side is that's kind of slightly less kind of fashion related because it's two soldiers who a lot and I'm not sure exactly, can't remember where the display actually was. That was the kind of mid early, I think it was early to mid 1970s. Well, they still wear a kind of similar thing, but it's a kind of gives you an idea of clothing worn in different time periods, different outfits worn. And the bottom right hand side was, I think that was taken some point in the 1960s. I think that's from most of these are from my family archives that you see now. And the top right hand side was just from a few weeks ago. So again, so that top right hand side, you would, if you went out now, you'd expect people to kind of wear these kind of clothing. So clothing is obviously a good clue if you're trying to guess where photographs are coming. A lot of people will look at the clothing. Transport is also something that will people look at. I mean, it's a big clue, obviously. The top left side, you can see the VW campervan, the orange and white top. That is from the late 1980s, that photograph from Family Holiday. The top right hand side is from, I think it was 72, 73, I think. That's in Paris, France, Champs Elysees. I think I'm not. I think I'm possibly butchering that pronunciation, but you can see the cars there. They look very classic 1970s cars. They are almost you expect to see in that kind of time period James Bond films, perhaps chasing after 007. But I know it's not the greatest, clearest picture because there's very few, unfortunately, kind of vehicle or transport photographs in the family archive that I've been looking through recently. But you can kind of get the idea of that. Bottom left side is obviously a big ferry, big cruise ship looking thing. And that's fairly recent. That was only about 10, 15 years ago. A lot of them still look the same, but obviously refinement. If you go to like a museum with perhaps like the recent V&A Ocean Liners exhibition, you will see a great change in the design of ships there as well. And again, bottom uh, right hand side, you see the train as well. Obviously, they have changed a lot over the years as well. Physical location. This is a great clue also about If you have the knowledge, of course, if you know the local area that a photograph is taken in, you can kind of guess. Because also, obviously with things like Facebook, there is been, certainly I've noticed it with Dundee groups. There's been quite a few groups set up on, public groups on Facebook set up, that will post old photographs of their local area, and if you have obviously knowledge of your city or your local area or somewhere you may have been, then you'll realise, even if you haven't been there for a few years, or so if you live there, you will see it yourself, in stages how the city is changing. I've highlighted the changes in Dundee before, and next year I will do so again in a kind of a follow-up video, just with the timings. I was going to do it this year, but you can see the top left side, that is the space, that was left where buildings such as the old Olympia swimming baths were knocked down, and the top, right side is obviously the RS Discovery, which you can see in that photograph on the left hand side, and it's kind of from the other side. So if you were trying to recreate the photograph taken on the 26th of September 2014, and I know that date to be accurate, then you would be standing, I think, somewhere in the midst of the V&A Museum. So obviously you can judge it again if you know the kind of timeline of the area. And again, the bottom left is the Derby Street Maltese, and on the bottom right is where they are building the apartments to replace that, those buildings now. So it's the same actual plot of land that the tower blocks are standing on. I know it's down the street away from them a little bit, but that's what that's a very recent, just a couple of weeks ago. So that's a very recent photograph, of them building the apartment stand there. So that all of that begs the question: should photographers really worry when they notice age creeping into their archived photos? So obviously I'm talking, if you've been taking photographs for a few years, even the same with sports, maybe setups and everything will change over time. Um, so should photographers worry when they notice that age is creeping in to their archives? And this is really about, if you're keeping an archive, a lot of photographers obviously will keep a lot of the photographs that they will take. No, I don't think that they should worry, because obviously you are, if you're going to be uh, doing photography for a few years, you will begin to build up things. As time goes on, you will start to uh, build up your collection of photographs. And let's be honest here. As soon as you press the shutter button to capture that moment, whether it's recent, whether it's time a while ago, it doesn't really matter. As soon as you press that shutter button and you capture that moment, even if it is, again, and I know I keep saying this, but if it's an iconic and timeless moment, if it really is a piece of history, time moves on. As soon as you press that shutter button, you capture that moment, time will continue to move on. It's a fact of life. Time will move on, things will move on, events move on, and that's life. It's just a natural part of life, and I think photography should, if possible, tell a story, even if it is the story of that one particular moment. Even if it is just that moment, you encapsulate that moment and it's there for eternity, you've preserved it. Even if it's just telling the story of people meeting for the first time, a festival, an event that you can see in these pictures, there various events, various things going on. Even if it's just that one moment you captured, Photography should tell a story, and eventually, let's face it, what is the story that all photography will tell? And that is life. Even if that, you know, that moment, that photograph you've taken, that's just a moment, and then you take another photograph and capture another moment, and another moment, and another moment, and as you move on, as you take photographs, life is basically the story that you eventually start to gather in photography. It is basically that. Even if it's odd moments of that, or especially, I think, to try and wrap this up, even if you take thousands of photographs but you only keep hundreds, people are always, as I said, looking for those iconic and timeless moments, otherwise also known as keepers, as some people will say. Life is eventually what you will capture, even if it is your life and your career or the kind of timeline of your local area. If you're into to kind of like I am, going around and capture the different changes that are going on, that's what you're going to capture eventually. Life, the story of life, and story of what is going on, whether it's your life, other people's lives, whatever it is. Photography will eventually tell that story. Um, and I know I could get kind of very deep into that. But I'm not going to in terms of, we've only got, we all have this kind of limited time thing, but photography will tell the story of life in the end, and that time period that you have. And so I don't think that photographers should worry at all if you start to see your photographs looking old, because not only do photographs capture those moments, they preserve them, but they also create things like memories. So you have the memory of that moment. You may remember that exact moment when you took that picture or that day or that event. So I think if photographers start to realise, I've got quite a few photographs that, looking at them, starting to look quite old. I think you should be proud of that. I think you should be glad of that. I think you should be happy with that, because, as I said, there's a lots of stories to tell, and part of photography is to preserve those stories and to be able to tell those stories even well into the future, well after they've happened.